Clara clutched her dying daughter on a scorching roadside, whispering, "Don't leave me, Ellie." Cars sped by, indifferent, as the 5-year-old's fever burned hotter, her small body limp. Bloodied knees, torn dress, and a mother's breaking heart, Clara had nothing left but love. Cast out by her husband's family, abandoned by her own, she prayed for a miracle. Then a truck slowed, and a stranger's voice broke the silence. "I've got water and a doctor. Would she trust him?" The sun burned without mercy, a relentless weight that pressed Clara Bennett to the earth. She crouched on the roadside, her cotton dress torn at the shoulder, knees scraped and bloodied. None of it mattered. Not the pain, not the heat, not the shame. All that mattered was the small, fragile weight in her arms. Ellie, her 5-year-old daughter, lay limp against her chest, cheeks flushed with fever, lips cracked, her tiny fingers loosely clutching the hem of Clara's dress. She hadn't stirred in what felt like an eternity. "Ellie," Clara whispered, her voice raw, frayed by thirst and grief. "Baby, please wake up. Don't scare Mama like this. I can't lose you too." Her words trembled, barely reaching the air before dissolving into the vast indifference around them. Cars roared past, their tires humming against the asphalt, each one a fleeting blur of metal and glass. None slowed, none stopped. The world moved on, and Clara remained, a mother with nothing but a fading child in her arms. Hours earlier, she had stood at the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, the home she once believed was hers. Beatrice Whitmore, her mother-in-law, had stood there in crisp white linen, her gaze cold as stone. "You are not family anymore," Beatrice said, her voice sharp, final. "You brought death to my son." Clara's throat tightened as she pleaded. Charles was drunk, he was angry, he shouldn't have driven. But Beatrice's eyes narrowed, cutting through her words. "He's dead because of you. You, his wife, his curse." Beside Beatrice, Percy Langston, the family's advisor, gestured toward the gate. "Leave now, or we'll have you arrested." Clara clutched Ellie, who was burning with fever, her small body trembling. "Please," Clara begged, her voice breaking, "just let me call a doctor. She needs help." The gate slammed shut, the metallic click, echoing like a gunshot. No one followed as Clara stumbled down the long driveway, her bare feet burning against the gravel, Ellie crying softly in her arms. Halfway down, Ellie tripped, her small body crumpling to the ground. Her head struck the concrete, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. Clara's scream tore through the air, but no one came. No one cared. She gathered her daughter, her hands shaking, and kept walking, each step heavier than the last. Desperate, Clara called her mother in Montana, her last thread of hope. "Mama, I just need a place to stay for a few days," she said, her voice thin, pleading, "just until I figure something out." Her mother's reply was ice cold. "We told you not to marry into that family. You chose Charles. Now deal with it." Clara's breath hitched. "But Ellie's sick. She's hurt." Her father's voice cut in, flat and final. "We have nothing more to say." The line went dead. Now on the roadside, Clara was nothing more than discarded weight, holding a child whose breath grew shallower with each passing moment. A torn canvas bag lay at her feet, its contents spilling out, a near-empty water bottle too warm to offer comfort, and a few crumpled dollars. Clara pressed her lips to Ellie's forehead, trembling. "God, if someone has to go, let it be me," she whispered. "Please, not her. Take me instead." The air shimmered with heat, pressing down like an invisible hand. No one stopped. No one looked. Until someone did. The hum of an engine slowed, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. Clara didn't lift her head. She had no strength left for hope. A truck door creaked open. Boots hit the ground. A shadow fell across her and Ellie, cool and sudden. Silence stretched, heavy but not cruel. Then a voice, steady, low, not demanding, just real. The little girl's burning up. "I've got cold water, a truck with AC, and a doctor who owes me a favor." Clara's arms tightened around Ellie, instinct overriding exhaustion. She couldn't trust, not after everything. The man spoke again, softer. "I won't touch either of you. I'll just leave this here." She looked up. He was tall, early 40s, in faded jeans and a gray shirt. his face weathered, eyes tired but kind in a quiet way. He set a sealed bottle of cold water on the ground a few feet away and stepped back, giving her space. No pressure, no judgment. Clara's hands shook as she reached for the bottle, unscrewed the cap, and dabbed a few drops on Ellie's cracked lips. The girl stirred faintly, a small whimper escaping. Clara looked at the man again. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His presence was steady, like a tree rooted against a storm. She nodded. Not out of trust, not yet, but because someone had finally stayed. Someone hadn't turned away. He opened the truck's back door. Clara rose on trembling legs, cradling Ellie, and stepped toward the vehicle, toward shade, toward water, toward the first sliver of humanity she'd seen in what felt like forever. Not safety yet, but no longer alone. The truck hummed steadily down the highway, its engine a low, constant rumble against the silence inside. Clara sat in the back seat, her arms wrapped tightly around Ellie, whose fevered warmth seeped through her thin dress like a warning. Every few moments, Clara leaned down to check her daughter's breathing, her lips brushing Ellie's forehead, whispering her name as if saying it could keep her tethered to life. The air conditioning blasted cold, a sharp contrast to the heat outside, but Clara barely noticed the chill prickling her skin. Her world was the small, fragile rise and fall of Ellie's chest. In the driver's seat, Silas kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. He didn't speak, didn't fill the silence with questions or assurances, but every so often, he adjusted the rearview mirror, not to check the road, but to glance at Ellie, to see if her chest still moved. Clara caught his eyes in the mirror once, quick and fleeting, and saw something there, not pity, not curiosity, but a quiet weight, like he understood more than he'd ever say. She didn't know his story, didn't know why he'd stopped when no one else had, but something in her gut told her he wasn't a threat, not tonight, not when Ellie's life hung by a thread. 15 minutes into the drive, Silas pulled over to the side of the road. Clara's heart lurched, her body tensing, ready to bolt. He didn't look at her, just stepped out, walked to the back of the truck, and returned with a small cooler. From it, he pulled a soft towel, soaked it in cold water from a bottle, and handed it to her without a word. His movements were deliberate, careful, like someone who knew how easily trust could break. Clara took the towel, her fingers brushing the damp fabric, and pressed it gently to Ellie's forehead. The girl whimpered, her eyelids fluttering but not opening. Clara's hands shook as she smoothed the cloth over her daughter's burning skin, willing it to pull the fever away. Silas climbed back into the driver's seat, but before he started the truck, he shrugged off his denim jacket. Clara flinched as he leaned back, draping it over her shoulders without touching her. The fabric was warm, heavy with the scent of earth and worn leather. "Keep it," he said, his voice low, steady. "The night's getting colder." In the mirror, his eyes met hers for a moment, then flicked back to the road. Clara pulled the jacket tighter, not for warmth but for the weight of it, like an anchor in a storm she'd been fighting alone. The truck rolled through a wooden gate as night settled, the sky a deep bruise above the horizon. Silas stopped in front of a brick farmhouse, its white shutters catching the faint glow of a porch light. He stepped out, unlocked the front door, and flicked on a light inside, then turned to Clara. "Guest rooms on the left, warm waters in the kitchen, medicines in the top drawer." His words were plain, not an invitation to stay forever, not a promise of safety, but a quiet offering of what he had. He didn't ask her name, didn't linger. He just stepped aside, giving her space to decide. Clara carried Ellie inside, her legs unsteady but driven by the need to keep moving. The guest room was simple, a bed with a faded quilt, a wooden nightstand, a single window with a thin curtain. She laid Ellie down, the girl's breathing shallow but steady. Clara's chest tightened as she scanned the room for a basin, a towel, anything to help. Finding nothing, she hurried to the hallway, panic rising like bile. When she returned, she stopped short. At the foot of the bed sat a basin of warm water, steam curling faintly upward. Beside it, a stack of folded towels, some wet, some dry. On top, a note in simple handwriting: "Water's warm. Test it first. Use the soft cloth on her skin." Silas was nowhere in sight. Clara sank to her knees beside the bed, dipping the softest towel into the water, testing it against her wrist before wiping Ellie's face, arms, and legs. The girl stirred, a faint whimper escaping, but didn't wake. Clara reached for another towel and found, beneath it, a small wooden hairbrush, its handle worn smooth. Another note lay beside it. "My daughter used to love this one. I hope it makes your little girl feel just as safe." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't cried when Beatrice slammed a gate in her face. She hadn't cried when her own parents turned her away. She hadn't cried when she carried Ellie through the burning gravel, her daughter's arm broken and her fever climbing. But now, holding this brush, this note, this quiet act of kindness from a man who owed her nothing, she broke. Tears fell silently, hot against her cheek. She pressed the brush to her chest, then gently ran it through Ellie's tangled hair. The girl stirred again, her voice a faint murmur. "Mama, this brush smells nice." Clara let out a broken laugh, the sound catching in her throat. The sobs came harder, not loud but deep, like something long buried, clawing its way out. In the hallway, Silas leaned against the wall, eyes closed. He heard her crying, the soft, ragged sound of a heart finally letting go. He didn't move, didn't knock, didn't speak. It had been years since someone else's pain had stirred anything in him, but tonight something shifted, not duty, not pity, but something raw, human. He let it settle in his chest, heavy and alive, as the house, once silent, began to breathe with grief and the faintest whisper of hope. Morning light slipped through the guest room's thin curtains, soft and golden like a promise not yet spoken. Clara stirred, her back stiff from sleeping on the floor beside Ellie's bed, her hand still resting on her daughter's small arm. The first sound she heard was Ellie's breathing, steady, rhythmic, no longer ragged. Clara opened her eyes and saw her daughter still asleep, color returning to her cheeks, lips no longer cracked, her small hand relaxed on the faded quilt. The fever had broken sometime in the night. Clara exhaled, a quiet release, but her chest still carried the weight of everything that came before. On the nightstand sat a tray, 2 slices of toast, a small bowl of jam, a hard-boiled egg, and a glass of milk for Ellie. A note in Silas's careful handwriting read, "Kitchen's open, I'll be in the garden." Clara stared at it, the simplicity of his words grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. She helped Ellie sit up, coaxing her to nibble at the toast and sip the milk. The girl leaned into her mother's shoulder, humming softly, her warmth no longer a warning, but a comfort. Clara smoothed her hair, the wooden brush still resting on the bed, its presence a quiet reminder of the night before. Venturing into the hallway, Ellie in her arms, Clara found a folded piece of paper on the floor just outside the room, a paper airplane, crisp and white, with "For Ellie" scrawled in black letters along one wing. Ellie's eyes lit up, a small smile breaking through her tiredness. "Did you make this, Mama?" she asked, her voice soft but alive. Clara shook her head. "No, baby. Someone made it just for you." The girl clutched the airplane, her fingers tracing the words, and for a moment the world felt lighter, like the air after a storm. Outside, the garden stretched in neat rows under the morning sun. Silas knelt among the plants, his hands deep in the soil, a wide-brimmed hat shielding his face. Clara approached, Ellie trailing behind, still holding the paper aeroplane. Silas glanced up but didn't stand, his focus on a patch of wilted mint. "It's dying," he said simply, gesturing to the leaves. "Weeds are choking it, but the roots are still good." Clara knelt beside him, her hands brushing the earth. "I used to garden," she murmured, almost to herself, "before everything." She pulled a weed, then another, her movements slow but sure. They worked in silence, their breaths falling into a quiet rhythm, the mint patch coming alive again under their fingers. As they stood, brushing dirt from their hands, Silas looked at her, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I'm sorry," he said. Clara blinked, confused. "For what?" He paused, his eyes on the horizon. "Not for anything I did, for what you've had to carry, alone." The words landed softly, like rain on parched ground. No one had ever said that to her, not her family, not her friends, not even herself. Clara's throat tightened, her eyes stinging, not with pain, but with something raw, and unfamiliar. I didn't know it was okay to feel angry, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Or tired. I thought I just had to keep going. Silas nodded, dusting his hands on his jeans. Sometimes surviving becomes a habit. They walked back to the house side by side, the space between them not empty, but filled with an understanding neither had to name. Later, as Ellie napped, Clara sat on the porch, a glass of water in her hands. Silas joined her, sitting a few feet away in an old rocking chair, saying nothing. The silence wasn't heavy, it was honest, like a conversation without words. Inside, the scent of mint lingered, faint but persistent, and a paper airplane rested beside Ellie's crayons, a small token of care in a world that had offered so little. Rain began to fall, a gentle patter against the porch roof. Clara cradled her glass, not drinking, just holding it, letting its coolness anchor her. She didn't look at Silas, but her words came anyway, low and unsteady. Charles was charming once, she said. The kind of man who made people laugh, who'd smile at strangers in the grocery store, but he wasn't good. Silas stayed quiet, his eyes on the rain-slicked steps. Clara's fingers tightened around the glass. After we married, he changed. Took my bank account, my phone, said it was easier that way. Then it was my clothes, my friends, my time. If I stayed home with Ellie when she was sick, he'd scream, say I didn't get to say no. Her voice wavered. Once, he put his fist through the wall right beside my face. The rain fell harder, a steady drum above them. Clara's gaze was distant, lost in the memory. The night he died, he was drunk, yelling at me over the phone because I didn't go to some charity event. Ellie was sick, crying. I hung up. An hour later, the sirens came. She swallowed hard. Beatrice showed up at my door, said I was the curse that killed her son. After that, she made every day hell, small cuts, like telling me not to touch the family photos because my hands brought bad luck. Clara set the glass down, her hands trembling. When she told me to get out, I had nowhere to go. My own mother said I chose wrong, that I had to live with it. My father hung up. Silas slid a folded napkin across the porch floor, his movements slow, deliberate. Clara took it, dabbing her eyes, though no tears fell. I'm not crying for them, she said, her voice firm but soft. I'm crying because you didn't ask me to explain. You just let me be. Silas leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. You didn't do anything wrong, he said, his voice steady, like a truth he'd known all along. You survived something most people wouldn't. Clara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. Do you ever worry, she asked, almost too quiet to hear, that if you care again, you'll lose it all, like before? Silas didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the wet grass, his hands resting loose in his lap. Every day, he said finally. But what scares me more is living like I already lost everything. Clara nodded, her eyes glassy, not with sadness but with the weight of being seen. The rain kept falling, soft and steady, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt something settle. Not trust, not yet, but space. Space to breathe, space to sit, space to carry her grief without carrying it alone. The days blended into a fragile rhythm at the farmhouse, each one a careful step away from the edge Clara had teetered on. Ellie's strength returned slowly, her laughter echoing through the house as she colored paper airplanes or chased dust motes in the morning light. Clara watched her daughter closely, every smile a small victory, every giggle a stitch in the fabric of her heart. But beneath the quiet warmth of the ranch, a shadow lingered. Not in the rooms or the garden, but in the world beyond the wooden gate. Clara felt it first in town. The market, once a place of small nods and familiar faces, had changed. Eyes followed her, not with kindness, but with judgment, their gazes sharp as needles. She stood in line at the bakery, Ellie clutching her hand, only to hear the woman behind the counter say, "We're sold out," despite the fresh loaves stacked on the shelf. Clara's stomach twisted, but she nodded, leading Ellie out without a word. Outside, a whisper drifted from a group of women by the door. She's staying at Silas Whitmore's place. Bet she's after his land. Another voice, lower, cutting. "That girl's not even Charles's, you know. Whole thing's a setup." Clara quickened her pace, Ellie's small feet stumbling to keep up. "Mama, why don't they talk to you anymore?" Ellie asked, her voice small, her eyes wide with confusion. Clara knelt, forcing a smile. "They're just busy, sweetheart," she said, but the lie tasted bitter. How do you explain to a 5-year-old the cruelty of grown-ups, the way stories twist into weapons when people stop caring for the truth? Back at the ranch, Clara set her purse on the kitchen table and reached for a skillet, but her hands trembled too much to hold it. She leaned against the counter, palms flat, breathing hard, as if the air could push back the weight of those words. Ellie's voice came from the living room, soft and scared. "Mama, did I do something wrong?" Clara's heart cracked. She slid to the floor, knees to her chest, and shook her head. "No, baby, never." Her voice was steady, but inside she was unraveling. The whispers from town weaving into the ones she'd carried for years. Beatrice's voice calling her a curse. Her mother's telling her to live with her choices. Silas found her there, the kitchen dark, a pot of uncooked rice on the stove. He'd come in from the barn, dirt smudged on his jeans, his hat in hand. He didn't speak, just crossed the room and knelt beside her, his presence steady, unintrusive. Clara looked at him, her eyes swollen with unshed tears. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. She didn't pull away. He led her outside, past the mint patch they'd tended together, to an old willow tree by the fence line. They sat in the grass, the evening breeze stirring the branches above, casting shadows over their faces. "You can stay quiet when the world's screaming," Silas said, his voice low, like a secret shared with the earth. "But you don't have to stay quiet with me." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't want to ruin your life," she whispered. "I see how people look at you now, like you're a fool for letting me stay, like I'm something broken that doesn't belong." Silas met her eyes, unflinching. "If anyone thinks I'm a fool for helping a woman who carried her child through hell with nothing but her own hands, then their judgment ain't worth much." Clara blinked, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I feel like I'm wearing a sign," she said, her voice breaking. "Like everyone sees me and only remembers what I lost, what I failed at." Silas pulled a blade of grass, rolling it between his fingers. "I don't see that," he said quietly. "I see a woman who's still fighting, even when she's bone-tired." He didn't reach for her tears, didn't try to fix her pain. He just sat there, close enough to share the weight, far enough to let her breathe. The silence between them was thick, not with tension, but with every unspoken hurt they'd both carried too long. That night, as Ellie slept with her paper airplane tucked under her pillow, Clara sat at the kitchen table, staring at a piece of mail she'd found in the mailbox that morning. The envelope bore the seal of Shady Valley County Court. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open, the words inside slicing through her like glass. Petition for legal guardianship, Beatrice Whitmore versus Clara Bennett, grounds, endangerment, negligence, mental instability, requested relief, sole custody of Eleanor Bennett, age 5. Her vision blurred, the paper slipping from her hands. Ellie stirred in the next room, her small voice calling, "Mama!" Clara rushed to her, dropping to the bed and pulling her daughter close. "What's wrong?" Ellie whispered, her eyes wide, catching the fear in her mother's face. "Are they taking me? Did I do something bad?" Clara's arms tightened, her voice fierce but soft. "No, baby. You're perfect. You're mine." She pressed her lips to Ellie's forehead, her heart pounding with a fire she hadn't felt before. Not rage, but resolve, a mother's love that refused to break. Silas appeared in the doorway, his eyes catching the envelope on the floor, the tension in Clara's shoulders. He crouched beside them, his voice steady. "If you can't hold her on your own," he said, "we'll hold her together." Clara looked at him, her eyes wild with fear but flickering with something new. Trust. Fragile but growing. "She's all I have," she whispered. Silas nodded, his gaze unwavering. "And that's all the reason we need." The room was quiet, save for Ellie's soft breathing, but in that silence something shifted. Clara wasn't alone anymore, not tonight, not in this fight. and for the first time she felt the faint outline of a strength she thought she'd lost. The days that followed the court letter felt like walking through fog. Every step heavy, every sound muffled by the fear that gripped Clara's heart. She barely slept, her nights spent at Ellie's bedside, brushing her daughter's hair with the worn wooden brush, as if each stroke could hold her closer, keep her safe. Ellie sensed the change, her small hands clutching the paper airplanes Silas had made, her eyes searching Clara's face for answers she couldn't give. "Mama, you're sad," she'd whisper, and Clara would force a smile, saying, "Just tired, baby." "You're my light." But the weight of Beatrice's petition pressed down, a shadow that followed her everywhere. The town's whispers grew louder, their judgment sharper. At the general store, Clara overheard a man mutter, "She's got no business raising that girl, not after what happened to Charles." A woman nearby nodded, her voice low. "Poor kid deserves better than a mother like that." Clara kept her head down, her hands trembling as she paid for milk and bread. Ellie, swinging her legs on a stool, didn't hear, but Clara felt each word like a cut, deeper than the last. She stopped going into town after that, the stairs too heavy, the silence too loud. The ranch became her world, its wooden gate a frail shield against the outside. Silas noticed. He didn't ask why she stayed behind when he drove to pick up supplies, but he started bringing back small things, a pack of crayons for Ellie, a bar of soap that smelled like lavender for Clara. One evening, as Clara sat at the kitchen table, the court papers spread out before her. Silas set a mug of tea down and took the chair across from her. The words on the page blurred: endangerment, negligence, mental instability. Each one a knife twisting in her chest. "I can't lose her," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll die if they take her." Silas leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice steady but fierce. "Then you fight, Clara. You've carried her through storms most folks wouldn't survive. You're still here." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "What if it's not enough?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Silas's gaze didn't waver. "Then I'll stand with you. I've never seen anyone fight as hard as you just to love someone." Clara covered her face, her body shaking, not from fear alone, but from the weight of being believed in, of being seen. The next morning, a new presence arrived at the ranch. Silas's mother, Eleanor, stepped through the door, her beige coat buttoned neatly, her hair pinned back. Clara froze, her hands tightening around a dishcloth. Eleanor's eyes, sharp but not unkind, took in the scene. Ellie coloring at the table, Clara's tense shoulders, the quiet hum of the house. "I heard about the girl," Eleanor said to Silas, her voice even. He nodded, setting down a coffee mug. She and her daughter needed somewhere safe. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Clara. "And is it safe for you too?" she asked her son, her tone soft but pointed. Clara's heart sank, expecting judgment, another door closing. But Eleanor turned to her. "Join me outside?" she asked, her voice not warm but steady. They stepped onto the porch, the air cool with the scent of mint from the garden. Eleanor leaned on the railing, her eyes on the horizon. "I'm not here to oppose you," she said. "I'm a mother. I've lost. And I know how grief changes you, not just in the moment, but in every moment after." She paused, her voice softening. "My worry isn't who you are. It's what happens if Silas opens his heart again and you leave." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm not asking to belong," she said quietly. "I'd go if I thought I'd hurt him. I only want to keep Ellie safe." Eleanor studied her, then nodded, a small gesture but heavy with meaning. "I know what it's like to outlive your child," she said. "The silence that follows is the loudest sound in the world." Clara's breath hitched. "It's all I've heard for a year," she admitted. Eleanor didn't reply, just stood there, the space between them softening, not erased but different. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of butter and warmth. In the kitchen, Eleanor was setting out a plate of scones, their edges golden. "I used to make these for Silas when he was small," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "They're better with honey." Ellie clapped her hands, her eyes bright. "They smell like cookies," she chirped. Clara blinked, caught off guard, and murmured, Thank you. Eleanor met her eyes. Children remember the small things, she said. A warm kitchen, a smile at breakfast. Make sure she remembers. There were no embraces, no grand gestures, but when Eleanor poured 3 cups of tea, one for herself, one for Clara, one for Silas, it was enough. Clara felt it, a shift, not in the world but in her own heart. She wasn't alone anymore, not entirely. The court papers still loomed, the town's whispers still stung, but in this kitchen, with the child laughter and a plate of scones, there was something new, a fragile thread of belonging, woven from quiet acts of care. And for the first time, Clara dared to believe she could fight, not just for Ellie, but for the life they might build, together, in the shadow of all they'd lost. The courtroom was a cold, sterile box, its gray walls swallowing the light. Clara sat at the front, her hands clenched in her lap, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow she'd learned to expect. Silas sat beside her, his presence steady, his worn boots planted firmly on the floor. Behind them, Eleanor took a seat in the second row, her hands folded neatly, her face unreadable but her presence a quiet anchor. The judge's voice droned through legal terms, but Clara barely heard it, her mind fixed on Ellie, who was waiting at the ranch with a neighbor. The thought of her daughter's small hand clutching the paper airplane kept Clara's heart from unraveling. Beatrice Whitmore sat across the room, her white linen dress pristine, her gaze icy and unwavering. Her lawyer's words cut through the air: unfit mother, endangerment, instability, each one landing like a stone on Clara's chest. She wanted to scream that she'd carried Ellie through fire, that she'd fought with nothing but love, but her voice stayed trapped, silenced by the weight of the room. Silas's hand rested on the table, inches from hers, not touching but close enough to feel. "Breathe," he whispered, so low only she could hear. She did, a shaky inhale, grounding herself in his steadiness. The judge called for Clara's statement. Her legs trembled as she stood, her voice small at first, then growing stronger. "I'm not perfect," she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I've lost everything, my home, my family, my name, but I've never stopped loving my daughter. Ellie is my reason to keep going, even when I didn't know how. I carried her when no one else would, and I'll keep carrying her, no matter what." Her voice broke, but she didn't stop. "She's not a burden. She's my light, and I'll fight for her until my last breath." The room was silent, the air thick with her words. Silas's eyes stayed on her, a faint nod of pride in his gaze. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap, her expression softening, as if seeing Clara for the first time. Beatrice's face didn't change, but her fingers twitched, a crack in her composure. The judge took notes, his pen scratching the quiet. Clara sat down, her hands shaking, but her heart steady, fueled by a fire she hadn't known she still had. When the judge read the verdict, time seemed to pause. Petitioner's request for custody is denied. Full legal custody remains with the child's mother, Clara Bennett. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Clara didn't breathe, didn't move, afraid to believe it. Then Silas's hand brushed hers, just a fleeting touch, and she turned to him, her eyes glassy with tears. Behind them, Eleanor reached forward, squeezing Silas's shoulder, her own eyes shining. Clara met her gaze, and Eleanor gave a small nod, not of pity but of respect. That night, the ranch house felt different, alive with a warmth that hadn't been there before. Ellie sat at the dinner table, chattering about a glitter sticker a girl at school had given her, her paper airplane tucked beside her plate. Clara listened, her heart lighter, the clink of cutlery and the smell of roasted vegetables wrapping around them like a blanket. Silas passed the bread, his eyes catching Clara's with a quiet smile. Eleanor scooped more mashed potatoes onto Clara's plate without a word, her gesture small but deliberate. No one spoke of the courtroom, but the air was different. Not just shared space, but shared life. Later, Clara and Silas worked in the garden, pulling weeds under the amber glow of the setting sun. Ellie sat nearby on a blanket, coloring a picture of 2 tall figures and a small girl, holding hands under a tree. Clara wiped her forehead, dirt smudging her cheek, and glanced at Silas, who was inspecting the mint patch. "Do you ever think," she said softly, that people only stay if they don't know the whole story? Silas paused, leaning on his rake, his eyes gentle. I see all of it, Clara, he said. The broken parts. The pieces you've glued together just to keep going. That's why her breath hitched, not from sadness, but from the terrifying, beautiful truth of his words. He wasn't asking her to be whole, wasn't waiting for her to fix herself. He was choosing to stay, dirt and all. Clara didn't reply, but her eyes held his, a silent acknowledgement of something growing between them. Not love, yet, but something stronger, built from shared silences and steady hands. As the evening cooled, they packed up their tools and walked back to the house. Ellie ran ahead, her drawing flapping in her hands, eager to show Eleanor. On the porch, Clara and Silas sat on the old swing, their hands dusted with earth, the scent of mint clinging to their skin. He reached over, his fingers lacing through hers, not tightly, just enough to say he was there. Ellie's laughter rang out in the yard, bright and unbroken, chasing the last light of day. Inside, the house glowed, its walls no longer echoing silence, but humming with life. With movement, with family, not born of blood, but of the quiet choice to keep showing up. Clara's journey hits hard because it's about more than survival. It's about finding light in the darkest corners. Her strength, forged in loss and love for Ellie, reminds us that resilience isn't loud, it's the quiet choice to keep going. Silas's compassion, offering a hand without asking for trust, shows how small acts can rebuild a broken world. I believe their story speaks to anyone who's felt alone, proving that family isn't just blood, it's who stays when the world turns away. Some might argue Clara should have fought harder sooner, or that Silas's kindness seems too good to be true. But isn't that the point? Hope often comes from unexpected places. What do you think? Can broken things truly grow again, or do they carry their cracks forever? Thanks for joining us in this story's heart. Share your thoughts below, follow for more, and let's keep these stories alive together.